Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Foster Files, a podcast about animal rescue and welfare. My name is Kelly, and every week I talk about issues surrounding animals in this country and to the people who are passionate about making their lives better. Joining me today is PA State Senator Nick Pisciottano, representative of the 45th Senatorial District and co-chair of the Animal Protection Caucus. Elected in 2024, Senator Pisciottano believes his previous experience in the private sector will help him shape meaningful public policy for Pennsylvania residents and the animals that we care about. Hi, how are you today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I am really excited to dive into some of the issues in Pennsylvania with you, and just get a little bit of an idea of how we, as a small group of really passionate people, can maybe help some of support some of the things that you are working on. But at first, if you wouldn't mind, tell me a little bit about and tell our listeners who might not know a little bit about yourself and what you're hoping to accomplish in your role in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives.
Sure. So I live in Western Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh. Represent 37 communities in this area. I served for 4 years in the Pennsylvania House, and now in the second year of my 4-year term in the Pennsylvania Senate. And so from the beginning, I've always been very focused on animal protection issues. I've joined the Animal Protection Caucus when I was brand new in the House, and now have the honor to be one of the four co-chairs of our Animal Protection Caucus in Harrisburg. The caucus itself is bipartisan, bicameral. There's 253 senators and state representatives in our General Assembly, and our caucus boasts at least 90 of those folks. So by far the biggest single issue caucus in Harrisburg right now. And it really shows that animal protection issues can be very bipartisan, even in the current times we live in, which is, sometimes very acrimonious and partisan. And so we've really tried to focus on passing legislation and addressing issues related to animal protection during my time in Harrisburg. And we're continuing to fight that battle to make sure our furry friends have what they need and are protected. Personally, my wife and I have two rescue dogs. One is a mix of many different breeds that we rescued from a kill shelter in Tennessee, and the second is the run of a litter from a farm that we rescued from Ohio, who's a cross between a Jack Russell Terrier and a Swiss Mountain Dog. And so she has the body of a Swiss Mountain Dog and the head of a Jack Russell Terrier, and the energy of a Jack Russell Terrier, unfortunately, sometimes. But so yeah, we've always been animal people, and in Harrisburg, I've always tried to focus on issues that I can improve people's lives, and animal protection is one of those things that, because it's bipartisan, we can actually move policy forward by passing legislation, addressing issues that come up to make sure that pets are protected and animals are protected.
So tell me a little bit about some of the things that you're currently working on in the Animal Protection Caucus.
So every session, we have a number of bills that we try to push forward. A session for us lasts 2 years. So you have basically a 2-year period to get a piece of legislation all the way through the House, all the way through the Senate, and sign it into law by the governor. If it doesn't get all the way through, let's say it only gets to the House, it has to start all over again. And that after that 2 years expires. And so every year or every 2 years, the Animal Protection Caucus puts together a list of bills that we hope to get done. And for the things that don't get done, we roll those forward going into the next session. And so there's things like ending live pigeon shoots, instating rodeo bans, exempting pet adoption from sales tax to make it a little bit more affordable. Personally, I have some legislation related to the financing of pets at puppy mills to make that to basically ban that, so that these puppy mills can't just use these outrageous financing agreements to convince people to buy animals, and then also manipulate them into really high interest, basically payday loan kind of situations. And so there's a lot of different things that we try and focus on and push forward through the Senate, or push forward through the House and the Senate. And so, we have a whole litany of issues that we're always working towards every session.
So by your own words, this is the largest single issue caucus and it's very bipartisan. Why do we have some legislation that really gets held up if it has so much bipartisan support behind it? And I would assume general, voter support. Why do you think some of these things get held up? And I can ask about specific legislation because I do have a couple of things I want to ask about, but I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, so in different state legislators operate differently. Our state legislature in Pennsylvania is full time. And like I said, there are 50 members of the state Senate and 203 members of the state House of Representatives. And so that's a lot of, it's, I think, the third largest by number in the state or in the country. And so that's a lot of elected representatives from a very diverse state, lots of different parts of the state. And there's a lot of different priorities. And so even though a lot of these bills have bipartisan support, the battle ultimately becomes making them high enough priority to get done. Um, because there's that many of senators and representatives, there are thousands of bills that are filed every session. I think the House will have about 4,000 or 5,000 bills, and the Senate will have about 2,000 or 3,000 by the time we're done with it. And so there's, even if for bills that are bipartisan or have very little to no support, you still have to generate enough momentum and and show that the public cares enough about the issue to make those bills move up the ranking of priority and actually be able to be moved forward for a vote and into passage into law. And so it's not necessarily in most cases that there's opposition, it's that there's not enough groundswell of support to move them up the priority list. And that's why, like, things like what you do with your podcast, or folks who listen to this that engage with their elected representatives, why that work is so important. Because on any given day, as a legislator, I have 100 to 150 different things going on. But if I'm hearing from people that I represent that a certain bill is important to them, then that automatically is going to move that bill up the ranking of my priorities, right? And so engaging with your elected representatives and making sure that these animal protection issues are super important helps me in the building move these things forward as well.
Think that there is maybe a perception out there among the general public that their voice doesn't necessarily matter, that somebody in your office is reading those emails, they never see you, or if they're not phrased a certain way, they're not necessarily going to get the attention or the, um, dedication that they deserve. What would you say to maybe someone that you represent feeling that way?
I understand there's broad disillusionment with government on probably every level right now, and every elected official handles this in a different way, but there are most, I would say, in Harrisburg that do take the time to understand what they're being contacted about. On deeply partisan or controversial issues, it's almost baked in that you're going to hear from both sides, whatever the argument is. You're going to hear from the people who are for something, hear from the argument of people who are against something. And so that kind of can get drowned out in the noise. But if I have a constituent that emails me about something like an animal protection issue, which isn't necessarily a two sides issue, it's more of a priority issue, that does go a long way. Emails, calls to the office, that stuff gets filtered back to the elected officials on an almost daily basis. And so if people are calling or emailing or writing or engaging in any way, that does get back to the elected official. And on animal protection issues, as I said before, that drives how important that issue is on the list of priorities, right? Because I'm not hearing from people who are against animal protections and for animal protections. I'm hearing from people that say this needs to be more important to you. And therefore, I'm saying, okay, well, my constituents want this or care deeply about this issue. Let's move it up our priority list and try and get it done. And so I I understand the crux of your question, and I think that in deeply partisan or controversial issues, times that is, constituent feedback may seem like it doesn't matter. But on issues like animal protection, where the whole goal is to make it high enough priority, that constituent feedback, that grassroots support is super valuable, because that's how we get these issues elevated and ultimately in place for a vote and hopefully signed in the governor or signed by the governor into law. And so that advocacy is super important and it shouldn't be discounted.
Before we finish today, I want you to let people know exactly how they can become advocates with not only if they happen to be in your area, but in their own state, in their own district. So we'll make sure to touch on that. But before we head that way, let's talk a little bit about some of the specific legislation that you have either co-sponsored or written, and get a better idea of what type of protections you're focusing on. I am curious, and then this wasn't part of my initial kind of list that I wanted to talk about, but I am very curious about the financing one, specifically about, you said that we want to make sure that, puppy mills aren't able to use, I'm going to say predatory lenders to, basically finance this horrible operation. Let me ask you this. Have you or are you considering expanding it past dogs? Because I do know that there's also lending out there specifically for like parrots and exotic birds as well.
Yeah, I said puppy mills, but it was really kind of that retail industry for
Okay.
pets of all kinds because that is already kind of a predatory model, and then they're using predatory financing mechanisms to make it even more difficult uh, to pay for the pet, right? And then
Hmm.
ultimately, we see that a lot of those pets get returned or abandoned, and so it creates this very vicious cycle where folks go in to
Hmm.
buy a nice snuggly puppy or they go in to buy a parrot or whatever it is from a pet store, and they're then set up with financing on 50 or 100% interest terms, and they end up paying ridiculous amounts of money for this pet, which probably means that they can't pay for the vet bills or the food or whatever, and then it compounds the problem for them to be able to raise the animal, and then they have to find a way to get rid of it, basically. And it, it's very predatory. That was the right word for you to use
Hmm.
because that's how I would describe the whole situation. And so we want to look at ways to kind of crack down on that and make sure that those predatory type loans are not able to be used for financing pets like this because it's not a system that works for anybody.
So then, if you don't mind me asking you about kind of the nuts and the bolts of how that would work, because this is not the first time that this specific issue has come up in conversation with one of my guests. I'm curious, are you then basically saying that people in Pennsylvania shouldn't be able to have access to these predatory loans? Or are you saying that lenders don't have access to consumers in Pennsylvania? Or is it the product that's based in Pennsylvania that can't be accessed? How does that work?
It's a good question. I'm not 100%
Sorry.
on the nuts and bolts right now, but there
Okay.
are things that I honestly, I don't even think this bill is released to the public. So this is like kind of a sneak peek, but we are
Okay, fair
still kind of
enough.
working out the details on that. The state in general has a lot of oversight over banking rules. And so uh, we have the ability to basically cap interest for some stuff like this. We could just outright kind of ban it, but we could also play with some of the interest rates and things like that. Some of the pushback we got was like, well, then people won't be able to use credit cards to purchase a pet. And, some people need to do that to stretch out kind of the payments. And we don't want to, we don't want to mess with kind of that piece of it. So we're trying to work out the way the language should be structured in a way that really segregates those predatory situations and
Mhm.
bans or prevents them from operating rather than completely taking out the ability to finance. Um, so to answer your question, the nuts and bolts on stuff like that is very important, and that's where we spend a lot of our time is trying to get that language right, so that there aren't unintended consequences that are going to cause all kinds of knock-on effects if this bill would become law. Clearing up those issues on the front end also makes it harder for people to oppose legislation like this because if they have easy ways to throw stones at it by, if it's not written 100% correctly, then it makes it easier for opposition to form. Whereas if we kind of lock down the form and content of the language on the front end, it makes our case a lot stronger to push it through the General Assembly. And so we're still working on kind of nuts and bolts of that right now. I can definitely get you more information, but it's a good question because it is very important on how we structure language when we're trying to pass these things into law.
Right, and I apologize for putting you on the spot. I was more just, like, curious about it because, to be honest, prior to having that conversation with my previous guest, I did not even know that those kinds of things existed. So I think what we can maybe take away from our conversation today is that if you are exposed to someone who is considering spending 2, 3, $4,000 to get an animal into their home and they're considering financing that, then they need to make sure that at this time that they're advocating for themselves and understanding those financing terms because it's potentially going to put them in a very dangerous situation that they wouldn't otherwise consider, right? Like, hopefully people are aware about how predatory payday loans are, and maybe they're just not aware that that predatory financing exists in this world. So, I mean, at least that conversation is happening so that people can be more aware that these things are out there.
Yeah, I mean, these companies are making money. That's why they're doing this. And so
Hand over
it's
fist.
people are either falling for it or being kind of arm twisted into it. And so it exists because
Mm,
it works, and it needs to be
right.
just a higher level of awareness about those kind of situations.
Right. I want to talk about another thing that you brought up. You talked about attempting to remove taxes from animal adoption fees. Tell me a little bit about that.
This is really just an accessibility kind of measure. We want people to adopt animals, right? And so, how do we kind of make it just a little bit more attractive? It wouldn't cost the state a ton of money in lost revenue, and it would just, hopefully lower the prices of adoption fees a little bit, just to make it a little bit more accessible for people. And so, it's not a it's a good example of something that's not like a huge deal, but in a small way, it probably does help get more animals adopted, and that's our end goal.
I love that. That's, I mean, again, to your point, it's these little things that can help us move the needle towards adoption and away from, purchasing and from factory, pet settings and things like that. One of the bills that I've learned about recently that I think is so important and so interesting is Victoria's Law. So for Victoria's Law, my understanding of it, and I just want to be clear, I got some information to prepare for this interview. I want to give credit to Suzanne from Pennsylvania Voters for Animals. She really helped me kind of formulate some really good content to talk about. So I didn't want to take any of that work away from her. But Victoria's law prohibits the retail sales of dogs, cats, and rabbits in pet stores to help reduce the commercial breeding pipeline and then, of course, increasing consumer protection and pet protection as a result. So, tell me a little bit about kind of where that law stands in this current cycle. Is that something that we need to help get behind? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, it unfortunately has not passed, and so we do need support to try and get it done. The from just my perspective, and I can't speak for everybody's, but the whole puppy mill industry and the pipeline of these kind of designer pets uh, is inhumane, and I think we should just ban them outright, to be honest with you. Uh,
Right.
but you know, there's not necessarily the appetite for that in the legislature to just go with a straight ban. And so, what we're trying to do is limit the pipeline of pets abandoned or whatever from getting through that puppy mill system and that designer system. And so, oh, has not passed in Pennsylvania. Would love to hear more advocates that get involved on that. It's not my piece of legislation, so I'm not super familiar with the details. But I know that my colleagues in the Senate and in the House have been working on it for a number of years to try and get it done.
Why do you think it's struggling?
It it goes back to kind of the priority thing that I mentioned before. You know, there's just a lot going on, and it can be difficult to get difficult to get voters or constituents focused on a certain issue like this that may not affect them on a daily basis. And so I think, wow, if you did a poll of something like Victoria's Law, you would get a very positive response. But also, if you ask everybody to call their legislature about Victoria's Law, you're going to get a much lower kind of response just because it's something that people generally support, but it may not affect everybody's lives every day. So they're not as engaged about communicating on it. And so it's really just a priority issue of trying to raise its awareness as much as possible and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's when it comes to puppy mills or whatever we want to call it, uh, backyard breeding, whatever we want to call it. I think there's a lot that people also just don't know about what is out there and what is the difference between a puppy mill, a backyard breeder, a legitimate breeder, and unfortunately, a lot of these places that are treating the parents cruelly or that have them in cages that aren't doing health screening, they're not truthfully representing themselves. So I don't know that people really truly understand how big the problem is.
Mhm. Yeah, we have some. It's not the same, but it's related. We have a number of beagle bills that are focused on the testing of using of animals for testing. That again are bipartisan, have actually received votes in the past, but haven't gotten all the way through the process yet. And so every year we just do more and more to advocate on those bills, raise awareness of those bills, and hope to kind of build that momentum and that pressure to get it done this session. And so we just have to keep pushing that rock up the hill. And like I said at the beginning, a lot of the animal protection issues are like that because there's not necessarily any kind of opposition. It's more about raising the awareness of the issues and trying to get them high enough on the priority list.
This definitely wasn't the direction that I expected this conversation to go. I didn't realize. No, I mean, truly, I don't always know how these things are going to go when I go into these conversations, and I'm learning so much. But it's so interesting to me because the world that I am currently living in and that I put myself in, it does seem like this is a priority for people and they're really concerned about it. But in actuality, how much is that actually turning into action that gets these bills passed? Because I picture these bills not passing, and I think a lot of lay people like myself would feel this way. I picture these things not passing because there's opposition, but ultimately they're not passing because it sounds like because they just don't have momentum and because you guys in the position to bring these things forward aren't necessarily hearing that there's this support that we want to get these things done.
Yeah, and like just to keep it in context, I said earlier, like there are thousands of pieces of legislation introduced in a 2-year session in Pennsylvania, and so at most you might get 100 passed into law a year. So at most 150 to 200 uh, in a 2-year period, and so you're talking about a success rate between number of bills that are introduced and number that actually make it all the way through the process and are signed into law of like 5% or less. And so, how do you make sure that these animal protection bills are part of that 5% rather than part of the 95% that don't get all the way done? And you're not going to get them all done at the same time. It's going to take multiple years of trying and building it up. You know, if we get through a 2-year session and we have a couple wins, that's a good session, right? You're not going to get everything all at once. And so we're just trying to, keep up the drumbeat of pressure and support and awareness so that of that 5% that ultimately get all the way through, 1 or 2 or 3 of the animal protection bills are part of that group. And so, it's not necessarily opposition. I mean, there are some bills that there are issues with certain groups or people, but for the most part, the animal protection stuff is really a matter of priority.
Let's talk a little bit about a bill that's been going on for a really long time and hasn't made any, hasn't passed in I think something like 30 years. And you actually brought it up is that pigeon shooting contest bill. Tell me a little bit about what that is again, refresh us what that is again, what's going on, and maybe how people can help support you guys in getting that finally banned.
Yeah, this has been one that has been going on for a long time, and this is actually an example of one that there is kind of an organized opposition to. The House actually has passed this legislation last year, I believe, but it hasn't gone through the Senate, and so it's a ban on live pigeon shoots, which are still legal here in Pennsylvania, and so Pennsylvania is, if you're not from Pennsylvania, it's a very diverse state. We have Philadelphia on the eastern side of the state, which is a major metropolitan area, one of the largest cities in the country. We have Pittsburgh on the western side of the state, which is not as big as Philadelphia, but still a major urban center. And then in between, you have a number of smaller cities, you have very rural areas, you have very heavy farm communities, you have suburban areas, you have post-industrial towns that used to have heavy industry and no longer do. And so there's a lot of various opinions and perspectives, and that's why our politics here in Pennsylvania is so mixed, and we're like the preeminent swing state in the country, is because
Hmm.
we have a wide range of views, a wide range of politics. And so for something like a bill that bans live pigeon shoot, the there are different perspectives from the folks that serve different parts of the state. And so if you're a rural legislator, your constituents may feel strongly about not banning this. If you're an urban legislator, you may not have an opinion because it's just not something that happens in your district. If you're in a suburban area that has a shooting club that does these, you might have a different perspective. And so there's a lot of debate, and that's why this issue has been around for so long. It hasn't really been resolved either way. And, you know, this one is something that we continue to talk to advocates about, continue to talk about what has happened in other states and hasn't happened here yet. And again, you're trying to build a coalition and some momentum behind getting that issue solved and, moving on to the next one. But it is one that is a little bit more contentious just because of its history and the wide variety of perspectives that Pennsylvania provides on an issue like this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that we're getting so many mar- uh, ad dollars for political ads in Pennsylvania. We're a huge swing state. It's our votes really matter in this state. And so, if you did not think that was the case, I think that the senator here is telling you your voice absolutely matters and your vote absolutely matters in any state that you're in. But especially if you're in the state of Pennsylvania, it really makes a massive difference. Um, I want to bring up kind of one last issue that I know very little about, but again, I'm kind of just learning about because I know that there is legislation and there are pieces that have passed. Specifically, a little bit familiar with Lee Gray's law, which passed a little while ago. I talked to Janine from Speranza Animal Rescue, who was a big part of passing that. And, it really says that you can't have your dogs outside in certain weather conditions without access to certain resources for certain periods of times, to say it in a very simplified way, because mostly I don't want to get the details completely wrong. But we see this happening still all the time. In a lot of the groups that I'm in and a lot of conversations I'm in, they say, we know that this dog is abandoned in this house. We know that this, animal is abandoned here or not getting the resources that it needs here. And a lot of the times in the comments, people will say, call the police, and the finder is going, I did, and they're not doing anything, or they told me they can't do anything. Why do we have a gap between past legislation and meaningful enforcement of those laws?
Yeah. So uh, it's a good question, and it's a hard one to answer, and it really does depend on the part of the state that you're in. And policing in Pennsylvania is very fragmented. There are parts of the state that only have state police coverage; they don't have a local police department. And then, of course, there are places that have local police departments. There are places that are in agreement with other neighboring communities, and they share police and things like that. And so, Lieber's law, does mandate protections for animals so that they can't be left outside and for long periods of time without water in cold or very hot temperatures. But enforcement is still a little bit uneven and difficult. The local police are sometimes hesitant to take up those cases because animal protection cases are difficult to prosecute, and they take up a lot of time, quite honestly. The state has some dog wardens all across, dog wardens and pet wardens, and the Department of Agriculture has inspectors. Um, and so we try to get them involved in situations that we hear about similar to this. But it's really just that the law is relatively new. And so folks haven't adjusted to it. Policing can be uneven in different places. And the Department of Agriculture, the state's Department of Agriculture's folks are spread very thin as well. And so there's not a great answer on why it's inconsistent, but we just have to keep talking to people. if you have an incident where something bad is happening in violation of Libra's law, definitely contact your local police. Definitely try to reach out to your elected officials on the state level to get the dog warden's office involved. Those are the kind of things that we need to do to build awareness. The ideal outcome here is that eventually people adjust to these rules and we don't need to investigate it anymore. But in the meantime, those investigations can be uneven, unfortunately.
When you said that animal protection cases are hard to prosecute, what did you mean by that?
There are different law enforcement uses or sees animal protection different than you would see personal property. If someone steals your car, uh, for whatever reason, the law and those district attorney, the law enforcement folks see that a little bit different than if something happens to your dog. I don't know why it is. I think it's just kind of a human, uh, because dogs are living, breathing animals. They're not seen necessarily in the same way as like inanimate property is. And so there can sometimes be disagreements about how those things are pursued. Maybe the dog just ran away. How do you know that somebody didn't accidentally leave the gate open and the dog ran away? Let's see if it comes back, right? You wouldn't say that about your car. Or,
Mm,
maybe that person was just taking the dog for a walk. They weren't stealing it, right? Like there's just different
mm.
ways of thinking about those issues. It's probably just a very human condition because pets are, alive and living and breathing. And so we've seen that sometimes investigations are uneven when it comes to pets and animals. It's not like I'm not disparaging law enforcement here when I say that. I just think that there is a human condition that looks at animals in a different way than other kinds of property. And so there's also sometimes barriers to funding for animal protection enforcement. There's I have a piece of legislation that kind of opens up some gaming funding that would allow district attorneys and law enforcement to investigate animal fighting rings using gaming money, because usually around animal fighting there's a huge amount of betting and illegal gaming, right? Um, but that doesn't exist right now. And so it can be difficult for law enforcement agencies who are investigating some of these gambling rings or these game fights or whatever to have access to the resources that they need, the money to purely pay investigators or detectives to do long investigations into these crimes. These animal, like in examples of animal fighting, the animal fighting rings are very complicated, very complex. They know how to hide the money and how to move things along. And so you have law enforcement who are outmatched. Some of these animal fightings, the purses could be in the millions of dollars, right? And it'd be very difficult to ask a local police sergeant to investigate that whole ring on his or her own, without substantial resources. And so we're trying to make sure that law enforcement has those resources to do these bigger, harder investigations. But even petty theft and things like that related to animals can sometimes be difficult to track down and prosecute.
What is something that you wish people knew about animal legislation and animal welfare laws at their state level, at their local level, or even at the federal level? What is something that you just wish the general public understood more deeply?
So this is in just in the animal protection issues, but in general, the state that you live in has a significant amount of impact on your daily life. The federal government, in almost all cases, has very little to do with anything related to animal protection, but your state government probably does have all the rules and regulations related to protection of animals in your state. The locals sometimes have uh, protections layered on top, so like extra protections. But the states do a lot of work that affect your lives every single day, not just in animal protection, but in almost every issue. When I teach civics class to high school seniors here in Pennsylvania every year, we talk about like, the roads that you drive on, the schools that you go to, the food available in the cafeteria at your school, the jobs that you can get, the minimum wage, your driver's license, like all that stuff that impacts teenagers on a daily basis, or the things that they think about, are controlled at the state level. Everybody knows who the president is. Fewer people know who the governor is. Even fewer
Right.
people know who their state senator is, and so
Right.
it's folks like me that need to hear from constituents about the problems, because we can probably actually fix some of this stuff. But if I don't know about it, it's the hardest problem for me to solve is a problem I don't know about. And so always I encourage everyone to know who your state level elected officials are, engage them as much as possible on any issue that you think is important, because the state has tremendous power to actually make things better. Uh, and probably does have the ability to do that because they're probably the ones that are in charge of whatever your issue may be. And so that's just a general PSA. But on, Pennsylvania level animal protection stuff, I would say if you live in Pennsylvania, reach out to me. I would love to hear from you, and we can talk more about anything that you care about deeply on the animal protection or any other front. Especially if you're my constituent, like my office does a lot to try and engage people and get feedback from folks on what's most important. And so, uh, please reach out. I would love to hear from you.
So that actually leads to my next question is how can people find out who their representatives are, either in Pennsylvania or in their state?
So usually you can just Google it. Sometimes it makes you put your address in if it can't figure out your location automatically. But if you Google who is my state legislator, it usually can figure that out for you, and make it really easy. If you live in Pennsylvania, you can go to our website, with our state General Assembly website, which is palegis.us. All the state level governments have websites just like this to help you identify who represents you. And it's an election year, so you will probably see yard signs or window signs in the place that you live. And if you just pay a little more attention to the names on those signs, you can probably quickly figure out who represents you. There are state level elections every 2 years, and so there's always somebody running that you can talk to more about your issues, and figure out who the loudest advocates can be for your important issues in the state capital in your state, or the person who represents you.
I'm gonna piggyback on that, and I'm gonna say that it absolutely does work to just reach out because that's the simplicity of how you and I got connected. It's that I looked up the Pennsylvania Animal Action Caucus. I saw there were so many more members than I was expecting, so I definitely had to weed through a much bigger list than I anticipated. But I saw that you were a co-chair in Allegheny County, and I literally just emailed your office. So when we talk about, this disenfranchisement with the government at the state or the local or the federal level, please understand that at least at your state level in Pennsylvania, your email absolutely matters. You are reaching the right people. Sorry for the shaky camera. Max just threw himself into the desk right underneath my feet.
He wanted to be part of the
um,
conversation.
he absolutely did. He needed to be a guest star. But it really, these emails are being read. You're not being put into some junk pile of mail. Like this is really happening and they really want to hear from you. So I'm actually going to put the link to that search tool that you indicated earlier, the state legis, and I will make sure that everybody that goes to the show notes will be able to click on that and find contact information for their specific Pennsylvania representative. I can't do it for all 50 states, guys, but like he said, Google is a very useful tool.
Yeah, the states are all different. And so if there's somebody watching this or listening to this from a state other than Pennsylvania, there could be different circumstances. But in Pennsylvania, and quite honestly, a lot of the Northeast, Midwestern states are all very similar. The point of the way state government is set up is that we're supposed to be accessible. Members of Congress have these ginormous districts, some of them millions of people, or 1 million people. Uh, but I represent about 250,000 people, and members of the state house only represent about 60,000 people. And so the idea with having as many legislators as we do in Pennsylvania and in some other states is that we're accessible, right? I can take the time to meet with constituents one-on-one because I don't have a district that spans, 3 different time zones. uh, the, the the point of state government in a lot of places is to make sure that these people are in the community, and that are accessible to their constituents. And so please reach out to your legislator and at least just build a relationship, even if you don't have an ask. Some of the honestly, most of the emails I get are negative ones, complaints, right? But I love getting emails that say, "Hey, I saw you on the news, great job." That kind of engagement uh, might seem trite, but it does help indicate to folks like me what's important to people and how we're doing. Am I doing a good job representing you? I don't get emails that say yes. I get emails that say no. And so, if you do feel that your folks are doing a good job, reach out and tell them that too, because it's important. That feedback is what makes us able to do our job better. And if we don't have that feedback, it can be very difficult to understand uh, what issues are important to constituents.
I think every single one of us has had a situation in our lives where somebody, they've ended some sort of relationship, whether it's a working relationship or a personal relationship, and they go, "Well, if that person had just told me what was wrong, I would have had an opportunity to fix it." And so ultimately, I feel like that's what you're saying is that you're saying, "Hey, let them know what's important to you. Let them know what makes sense to you and what's going right as well as what's going wrong, and give them an opportunity to make a change."
Yeah, I said earlier, like I say this all the time, but the hardest issue for me to address or fix is one I don't know about, right? If I don't know it's a problem or
Mm,
I haven't heard about it before, um, I'm definitely not going to be able to fix it, right? And so, um, the first step has to be that engagement of reaching out and contacting your elected folks so that they can, hopefully help you work through that. Uh, if you don't do it, they're never going to know. The most frustrating thing for me is when people come to my office or call me or whatever and say, I've been trying to figure this out on my own for months. And I say, well, if
mm,
you would have just came in months ago, we would have been able to resolve this
yep,
for you in 2 days because we know how to do it, right? Like we've done this for other people.
right.
Some people don't like to reach out and ask for help or are uncomfortable doing that and they waste their own time rather than just coming
Mhm.
to us to help, to give help. So that's what we're here for. That's what we're elected to do. And, I encourage people to engage with their state government.
That's amazing. I love that mentality because even one of the things I said in the email that I sent over to your office was, if he is not the right person to talk to, could you ask him to tell me who the right person is to talk to, right? Because you just don't know, like, if
Yeah.
you're gonna be the right resource for whatever it is that I'm looking for. And so that's another thing too, is that you guys are out there in the community. You represent 250,000, you said. You've probably
Yeah.
met a lot of community leaders, a lot of business leaders, and so ultimately, if somebody comes to you with an issue that you personally can't handle, you may know someone who can.
You're just hitting all my classic hits here. But like another one of my catchphrases is if I can't fix it, like we'll find the right person who can. Some things are, I'm a
Right.
state government official, maybe it's a county issue or a local issue or it's a business issue or whatever. But like
Mhm.
we deal with these things all the time every day. And so we can find the right person to plug you in with. Or if I can't help you, we'll find the right person who can. But if you don't come and ask, we don't know how to, we can't make those introductions. We can't handle that casework without knowing about it. So the first step is just having people reach out. And a lot of people are able to have their issue resolved in a relatively painless way only because they asked for it. And so just again, super encourage people to engage with their elected folks.
So, for all of my animal welfare advocates out there that feel like more needs to be done in their area or in their state, you now have your marching orders. Reach out to your local representative and let them know that you care about this, and ask the people in your life to reach out to their local representatives and just say, I care about this issue. It doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, hell, it doesn't even have to be grammatically correct. Just reach out and let them know what's going on so that they have an opportunity to do the work that you're asking them to do as their constituents. So I think this is a really good time to talk about a rescue that is local in your area and highlight it for our foster spotlight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So for everyone who is following along on YouTube, you are going to have the opportunity to take a look at the page for an adoptable cat that's at Fur All Kitties Animal Rescue. And Fur All Kitties has two connections to the center here. And the first is they are based in West Mifflin, which is where you are from. But tell me about that second connection. What is some of the work that you've done for Fur All Kitties?
Fur Orchids is doing a great job. We have a significant feral cat issue in some of our areas, and so they do a lot of work to find those feral cats, bring them back to health, get them adopted, and they came to me asking for some help with transportation because they were using their own personal cars. They were loading, unloading supplies every single time they went out to try and uh, rescue some of these feral cats, and so we were able to secure some grant money for them to purchase a dedicated vehicle to do that. And so they could just, have all the supplies on board, jump in the vehicle when they had to go rather than using their own personal cars or trucks. And so um, it's a great example of something that will probably save a lot of animal lives for a very low cost that allows these volunteers to go out and address some of the animal protection issues that we have here locally.
I also love the idea that some of the work that you're doing is not necessarily specifically behind a desk writing and passing legislation, that you actually did, sorry, I don't mean to sound, you
Yeah.
actually did work. I'm just saying that you were able to do an actionable item that made a real community impact, especially for this organization and for the feral cat community, because the feral cat community comes with a lot of issues that stretch beyond just the welfare of the animals themselves. So I think, because that many feral cats unfortunately contributes to more feral cats and contributes to actually a decline in its local songbird population, which we know about. And so there's just a lot of things that can come along with it that it's good to see some resolution happening there. So I want to go ahead and talk about this adoptable cat. And I chose AWOL for today's foster spotlight because honestly, her bio is hilarious. And sometimes in animal welfare, we need a little bit of levity. But I'm going to go ahead and read her profile. And for those that you can see, she's a really pretty, like kind of multicolored domestic short hair. But let's go ahead with her profile. So let's address the rumor mill first. When AWOL came in, she was a lot. There was chaos, there was spice, there was a lot of escaping. There was a brief, unfortunate nickname that we no longer acknowledge for curious minds, the Munhall Psycho, which is retired, sealed, and expunged from the record because she threw us a huge plot twist. Everything we thought about her was totally untrue. AWOL is actually a sweet, goofy, and endearing. She settled into rescue life like finally realized she's safe. No more rescue attempts, no more escape attempts, no more drama, just vibes. So AWOL isn't a menace. She isn't a psycho. She's just a cat who needed time to decompress and show us who she really is. And who she really is happens to be seriously the best. Please adopt her. So AWOL's adoption fee is $100. She looks to be almost about 2 years old, and she is a tabby that is currently spayed. They are unsure of her demeanor with dogs or kids, but she does get along with other cats. So if you are interested in taking a look at AWOL's profile or any of the other cats available for adoption at For All Kitties, I'm going to put the link in the bio so that you can go ahead and explore and support this awesome organization. So, if you wouldn't mind telling me, how can people connect directly with you?
So I have a really complicated last name that's hard to spell. So actually, it's really easy. My website is pasenatornick.com. And similarly, my email address is pasenatornick@pasenate.com. So you don't even have to worry about the last name. There's contact form on my website, all the information you would need to get in touch with me. I hope that folks do reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and you have an Instagram as well, is that right?
Yep. All my social media is at SEN Pisciottano. So that one's a little bit harder to get to. But if you go to my website, it has links to all my social media. You can click right through. Yeah,
Awesome.
couldn't avoid all the last name everywhere. But would love to hear people reach out if there's anything I can do for folks.
Well, I will go ahead and put your website in the show notes as well. And I do just want to remind our listeners who are still with us that you can follow the show at the Foster Files podcast on Instagram. If there's somebody else that I should be talking to, like the senator, please let me know at the Foster Files podcast at Gmail. And as a reminder, if you haven't subscribed already, in on May 1st, which is actually the day that we're recording this, my very first newsletter has come out, and it will be coming out monthly. So you can subscribe to my newsletter using the link in my bio or on my Linktree page. You can subscribe there, and I will just be sending it out once per month, so you won't be getting spammed by me. But Senator, thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck with the rest of your legislative session and in the midterms. I hope everything goes really well for you and that you have that you're reelected. That's incredible.
Thank you. I'm not on the ballot this year, so I am perfectly happy.
No, you should have told me to stop. So
No,
are you
no, we'll
just going
take.
back to the private sector then?
No, I have a 4-year term, so I was elected
Okay.
in 24, so I'm off this
So
cycle. But
you're just coasting at this point. So I need
yeah,
everyone to spam him with all the work that he needs to do because he's not worried about reelection. So we just need to spam him with all the bills that he needs to get passed in the animal welfare
I guess I
space.
deserve that. I shouldn't have said anything. But no, thank you for having me. You know, the biggest battle on so many of these issues is just awareness, and so your podcast and the things that you're doing to push out awareness on these issues is so critical. Even if it doesn't always seem like that, it is getting out to the people and getting to people's heads on why all these issues are so important. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much for your time today. And everybody listening, I want to remind you to be kind to yourselves and be kind to animals. Have a great day.